Hey guys, it's Ashen from Ashen Warrior Props, and today I'm going to show you how to build the Dead Space 2 Advanced Suit Helmet. Before we get started, I'd like to let you know if you want to go ahead and follow us during this tutorial, you can check out the link in the description where you can find templates to this build. And if you want to know what kind of foam I use HD foam from SKS Props. I'll provide a link in the description. Now without further ado, let's get to the video.
Once you've got your template, pull out the head shell pages. This is going to act as the foundation for your entire build. The middle two pieces, once removed from the paper, need to be taped together to form a really long piece. Once you've got this, get ready to transfer it to your foam. When I transfer templates to foam, I like to start by using sewing pins to hold them in place. Remember when you're cutting foam to keep your knife at a 90-degree angle to keep nice, clean cuts. Once you have your pieces cut out, go over it lightly with the heat gun, lightly bending each piece into shape to form a more round part. Once you've got each piece, get ready to put them together. My personal adhesive of choice is DAP contact cement. I use mine by getting a little squirt bottle, going lightly over the edges, and then smoothing it out with a silicone brush. For those of you who have never used contact cement before, it works by applying the adhesive to both sides, letting it set and get almost dry for about 2 to 3 minutes, sometimes 5, and then lightly pushing it together, adding more pressure as you go around. Remember to start out light and go really slow in the beginning to make sure every piece is lining up exact. The less ugly seams, the better off in the end. Once you've got each piece firmly in place and attached to its counterpart, get ready to align it with the middle piece. This part can be a little bit tricky for those of you starting out. Like I said before, remember to go slow, take your time, and make sure each piece is lining up just exactly how you want it to. Now, once you've finished pressing one side, rinse and repeat for the other side. After this, you're going to want to make sure it fits. Make a badass pose. After this, we're going to move on to the faceplate. This iconic piece is what made me truly fall in love with this set to begin with. Remember, when you're transferring the template to the foam, you remind yourself where the 45-degree angle cuts are. I like to cut my 45-degree angles slow and make sure my knife goes all the way through the foam to prevent ugly seams. Moving on, we're going to assemble the grill of the faceplate. We're going to start from the bottom and work our way up. Each piece has a really cool detail. We're going to start with the bottom, lightly put it on at the front, and roll our way back. Remember when using contact cement to make sure you're applying a lot of pressure towards the end once it's tacky, so it stays on nice and tight. Up next is the chin plate. This is a relatively simple part of the faceplate. First, you've got your base layer. Just after the base layer, you'll have a detail layer that looks almost identical to the base, but simply sits just on top. Once the chin plate is assembled, we're getting ready to stack the tiers on top of each other. Here we're starting with the chin and then working our way up to the first tier of the grill. Up next is tier 2 with the detail portion already added to it, using the detail as a securing point for the glue. The third tier can either be held on by plexiglass or using 4mm foam on the sides. In this version of my build, I opted to use 4mm foam to secure the third and second tier together. Now that the base build of our faceplate is done, we're adding the small details, starting with these odd shapes. Once each piece is ready, make sure it fits in the appropriate spot. This little piece fits appropriately in this little notch on the chin plate. Up next, we have these little shapes that are going to go on the second tier and these little nooks that look exactly like the outer parts of the shape. After that, you have a small piece of 4mm foam that slides under the second layer of the chin piece. Up next, we have these odd little shapes that for the life of me I can't figure out what they're called, but they fit snugly and securely right in this little notch on the chin plate. Once everything's good and ready to roll, we're going to move on to these weird layered crescent shapes. These fit right up against that little extra piece that goes under the second layer of the chin plate. You can form it at an angle if you want, but that's completely up to you. Now we're moving on to this beveled shape right here. After you've cut the pieces out on 10mm foam, use the bevel detail line to draw out where you want your bevel. Here I'm using a sewing needle just so I have an extra little bit of grip when I'm dremeling. Once the pieces are done, they should look somewhat like this. After you have both pieces, they go at a slight angle at the back end of the chin plate. Then simply rinse and repeat on the other side. Up next is the outer shell of the helmet. Once again, I'm using sewing pins to secure my template on the foam and trace it using a ballpoint pen. These are very iconic ridges on the back of the shell of the helmet, so go very slow and very carefully on the 45-degree angles so that we can get that nice shape. Make sure you're going slow and getting all the way through the foam with a sharp knife. This clean edge is worthy of glue. It's important on these curved pieces to go slow and make sure you're lining up the outer edge. For this particular build, I like to start with the top part of the outer shell, working my way from inside to out. Simply rinse and repeat for each one of these parts, making sure you're aligning the correct ones. Once the two humps of the outer shell are formed, you'll notice you have two weird shapes followed by triangles. These are going to fit right up here in the nook on the lower bump. Remember once again to work slowly from bottom to top to make sure everything lines up just right. Once you've got the triangle piece assembled, it should look somewhat like this. Following that, we have these little clips that hang right off the end of the bottom of the shell. They simply face like this, and there's nothing else to it. Now we're moving on to the small details portion of the build. This part is relatively easy as long as you follow the instructions. To start off, we're starting with these tiny steel plates that hide in between the inner and outer shell on the back of the helmet. Up next, we have these two weird boxes or humps. I don't really know what they are. To be honest, in this entire build, I look at all these shapes trying to figure out what they actually are. I don't think half of them have a name. This second box is the only piece on the entire build that you're not lining up two edges. It's just edge to flat space, which is kind of a relief. Next, we have a few beveled pieces, starting with these two strips. Up next, in your template, you have 4 separate pieces here. What we did is took a rectangle, beveled it, cut it in half 2 ways, like so. This is going to make attaching the 2 pieces a lot easier in the end. Once you've got them cut, don't forget you have a small trapezoid that goes on the bottom of the second box. Here is what that beveled edged shape we were talking about in the previous segment is going to look like once it's done. And this simply attaches to the bottom of the trapezoid. In your template, there's a piece holding it together, but it works all the same. Up next, we have the fins that sit on top of the faceplate. These are probably the easiest portion of this entire build. This part I'm doing out of 6mm foam to make sure they set . Just again, remember with the fins, you have 45-degree angles, make sure they line up and you're aligning the edges just right. Now up next, I struggle to find names for most of the objects on this helmet, but for this I'm at a true loss of words. I've been calling this thing a camera for years. It's the thing that sits in between the two flaps and on the center of the faceplate. I don't know, what should we call it? For starters, I have a steel punch that I made on a manual lathe to cut the centerpiece on the camera. A Sharpie cap works just as well though. Now remember, when working with something like this, you need to go extra slow. I've messed up this camera portion at least 20 times in previous builds. I like to start by placing each part laterally against the side of the camera. After this, I simply just attach the other side. I wasn't a huge fan of all the pen marks I'd made on the camera, so I went ahead and sanded them off with my Dremel. Now that we've finished all the build sections, it's time to attach it to the base of the helm, starting with the two beveled strips we cut earlier. Once we have the two beveled strips on and secured, we're going to move on to those two bumps. These fit just evenly on the back. Next, we're going to start with the upper layer of the outer shell. I like to start from the front, slowly pushing it forward on the 45-degree angle and working my way backwards. After that, it should look something like this when both sides are attached. Up next, we've got those tiny steel detail plates that go on the inside of the lower hump. The 45-degree edge on the steel plate fits perfectly inside the edge on the lower hump. Once that's done, apply both sides to the bottom end of the shell. Up next are the lenses for the helmet. I like to use 1/16 inch plexiglass or acrylic sheets. They easily snap off and form into place with heat. First things first though, I like to clean each section just to make sure there's nothing on it. Up next, I hold it over a 90-degree angled spot, heat it, and form it in place. Following this, I want to add a slight diffusion by using 1300 grit sandpaper in small circles on both sides to make sure we get a nice, cool, frosted white diffusion. Remember to leave a space that you don't diffuse so you can see. After you've diffused your lenses to your pleasing, you can go ahead and glue them in place. Now the fumes Loctite puts off are not good for you, so don't put this on your face anytime soon. Once each segment is glued into place, we're ready to move forward. It should start out by looking something like this. Now I've built this helmet several times now, and each time I've placed the lights at a different portion of the build. Currently, I think this is the best way to do it, installing them right after you've installed the lenses. Now these LEDs I'm using are custom 12-volt side-mounted LED strips from Diode Dynamics. These run off a 12-volt battery pack that's strong enough to power this entire suit. The side-mounted LEDs prevent the light from going directly in your eyes. They directly project onto the plexiglass or acrylic sheets you're using without harming your eyes. You can actually see out of this thing perfectly, believe it or not. If you decide to go the side-mounted LED route, I like to alternate the way the LEDs are facing so it's an even, powerful glow. Once everything's installed and ready to go, you can apply the faceplate to the base of the helm. I went ahead and added an extra piece of 2mm HD foam in between the faceplate and the base of the helm just for extra sealing. It's completely unnecessary though. Up next, we're going to attach the camera and the flaps. After everything's centered and attached, you have 4 rivets that go on the back end of the helmet. For these, I used my punch. But, again, a Sharpie cap works just as well. After this, there's some detail lines on the in-game version of the build that look as if they're separate panels. You can easily achieve this by scoring the foam lightly with a sharp knife and then heating it with a heat gun. Here I'm going over the entire helmet with heat, not just to open up those detail lines, but to heat treat the entire helmet to seal it up before priming it. After this step, you're ready to call it a day and enjoy your advanced suit helmet from Dead Space 2.
Okay, this is cool. I can actually see out of this one. Like in previous, like I can see the end of the room. You can see the fridge, and that matters. Alright, here we have it, the complete build of the Dead Space 2 Advanced Suit Helmet. This build was entirely made out of SKS Props HD foam. I'll provide a link in the description to his website where you yourself can purchase the HD foam. As well, we're going to leave a link to our Etsy store where you can find the Advanced Suit Helmet template. And that's pretty much it. If you liked it, feel free to leave a like and stick around. I'm going to be painting this in the next video as well as completing the entire suit. If you'd like to keep up with me more often, a link to my Instagram is also in the description. Thanks so much.